Dear Digital Product Passport community, welcome to today's episode of the 4TheRecord podcast. 4TheRecord is a consultancy agency that helps institutions and industry players to develop and implement their digital product passport and business wallet strategy. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Patrick Bergmann, General Manager of Madaster Germany. With Patrick, I explore the status of the product and material passports in the buildings and infrastructure industry. We are discussing why material passports in the building sector have unique requirements, what information the Environmental Product Declaration (EPD) is already providing today, how data exchange is handled in the construction industry today and where challenges lie, how the United Nations Transparency Protocol can help getting data for building material from the supply chain, and what we can learn from the battery industry, the regulation in the construction industry at the EU level, and what needs to happen next to make buildings more sustainable. I wish you an informative entertainment. Welcome to the podcast Digital Product Passport Insights. My name is Susanne Guth-Orlowski and I'm the CEO of 4TheRecord, a digital product passport consultancy agency. My guest today is Dr. Patrick Bergmann. He is General Manager of Madaster Germany, and I'm delighted to have you on the DPP Insights show today. Welcome, Patrick.
Hi, Susanne. Happy to be here.
Patrick, construction and demolition waste accounts for about 35 to 40% of all waste generated in the EU. Therefore, I would like to speak with you today about how digital product passports in the construction industry, or as you would say it, the material passport for buildings or infrastructure, can reduce this number. What the role of global standards in the construction sector can help or play to reach this goal, and what your role actually is at Madaster, and the next important steps that we need to make buildings more sustainable. Patrick, at the beginning, please introduce yourself briefly and your organization, explain your role in advancing transparency and data exchange in the built environment.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I'm happy to contribute to the topic of construction and real estate. As you mentioned, my name is Patrick. I'm a managing director for Madaster in Germany, and we kind of enrolled this now in the entire DACH region, so also Austria and Switzerland. By background, I'm more a city planner, urban planner, and economist, so no architect, no engineer. However, since more or less 10 years, I'm dealing with sustainable construction, sustainable real estate, and also with the perspective on the economic or financial view, because in normal real estate market, it's also about money, about the value of a building. So if you want to change something, it's rather easy if that somehow has an influence of the value of the building, because this will drive then the entire mechanism. And therefore, even in my PhD, I already thought, how are sustainable products, so products in the building with a low carbon footprint or with a high digestibility or good to recycle, how can they positively influence the value of the building? And this is also how I ended up at Madaster. We started in Germany 5 years ago, so around 2021. Originally, that's a Dutch idea. It originates in the Netherlands by some innovative and smart people there in 2017, so around 4 years earlier. As often, innovative things, especially in real estate, but not only, are coming from these Dutch people that drive the innovation, that are keen to test new things. And then now we're active in 7 countries, so it's a mature idea. And the basic is to make the materials within the built environment, so not only in buildings, but also in infrastructure projects, as you mentioned, more transparent in order to say what is in the building, where is it, what quality does the product has, can I take it out of the building? So is it available for reuse or recycling, to give it then a second life in a new building, in another building, in an infrastructure project. And the one reason is what you mentioned, that the real estate and construction industry is responsible for a large amount of raw material consumption. So all these houses need to build or be built by material. But connected to that also with more or less 40% of the carbon emissions, and not the emissions in use, but embodied carbon. So the emissions connected to production of that material. And that's a huge number. And at the end, a lot of buildings are still demolished, and there's waste, and we try to get rid of that part as well. So all this is connected to information, because there we go kind of in the product passport idea. With more transparency, we will gain efficiency and can think about how to reuse and recycle material. We have more information of the product and can make better decisions.
It's great to have, first of all, that the idea is maturing and that you're operating in more and more countries. That's great to hear. I don't know what was first, the smart idea of the people in the Netherlands or the upcoming construction regulation, which includes something like a material passport for buildings. You probably can tell me that. And for our listeners, I would like to understand what this material passport is containing, and what problems it aims to solve. I guess the ones that you just explained. So can you give us a bit of insights about the construction regulation and where it points to a material passport?
Yeah, happy to do so. So in comparison to batteries, t-shirts, or other electronic devices, we have some differences in real estate. And first of all, the product passport itself would be the passport of a brick, for example, or a window, or these kind of things. And the building consists of thousands of these elements. And this is why we kind of have an overarching passport that is then the building passport or material passport of a building, consisting of thousands of product passports. And often these products itself contain of different materials. So this is then similar to the battery or t-shirt or whatever. And what we do see is that these buildings last then for 40, 50, 100 years. So also in comparison to a t-shirt or battery, the cycles are much longer. And this is also where Madaster came into the game, because we said we need to make sure that the information we collect at the beginning, when a certain product is produced, until that moment when there's the refurbishment or even the construction of the building. So we talk about long lifetimes, we talk about a lot of materials, and that makes it a bit special. And then that is maybe comparable, but not always. We have a very fragmented value chain. So we have the architects or planners at the very beginning, they're drafting in theory. Then we go to the construction companies that really build, but it doesn't mean that the plans and the rebuilding are really the same. So there can be differences, not like when you design a car, the car that leaves the manufacturing hall is actually that car that has been designed. This is not the case within buildings. And then you hand that building to an operator that has an own facility management. It's sold like other products over the years, and then at a certain moment, people want to get access to that information. So that makes it a bit complicated. And to be honest, we are not the most digital industry as well. So we are drafting things on paper with a pencil, and that makes the digital documentation, what is the digital product passport, also more difficult. So I would say in theory, the concept is the same. The building is just a very large product. In practice, we face some differences, as we have a lot of people and different people with different professions involved. And maybe what is also interesting, our founder, Thomas Rau, also says, actually, most of the buildings are prototypes. So this is not the second building that is produced in the same way than the first one. every time we start a building, it kind of is done by scratch. So if you look to normal production processes, we talk more about prototypes than about final products. And that makes this standard documentation, digital documentation, very tricky at the end.
It sounds like a lot of complexity that you have. Thanks for explaining that so well. Coming back to the regulation. So when is material passport for buildings mandatory?
That's a very good question. If you would have asked me 2 years ago, it would have been an easier answer because it was in the coalition paper of the former legislation. So there it was stated that there will be a building passport or material passport for buildings.
In the German legislation, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
In German legislation, I know the Dutch legislation is working on. So the different countries are working on different ideas. That's also maybe a special one. But and it never happened in Germany. So in Germany, then there was the end of the coalition. We now have a new government, and they keep that idea in the closet. So it's there, but it's not used. On the other hand, we see on the European level, there is a European digital building logbook. So this is kind of a passport or a digital passport of a building. It contains more information than just the material and the amount of material and the constructability. So it's more information. And the Commission just recently asked CEN, so the European Standardization Committee, to draft the principles for this building logbook. So the process of a harmonized European idea how such a material passport for buildings or maybe even infrastructure. So sometimes this is similar, sometimes it's different. Is starting, and I think it was mentioned that 2029, that final concept needs to be delivered to the European Commission. Good news is that there is already some CEN activation on exactly that topic, on circular construction, with what information do we need, what is the format, how is the assessment done? So because it's not only about collecting the information, but normally you also want to have a kind of a judgment. What is a circular building? So some calculation methodologies that tell you, okay, this building has a score of 50 and this of 70, and 70 is higher. So this is a more circular building than the other one. So it's not only about the calculation, but also about the assessment. So things are moving, but I think we are one of those industries that always lag a bit behind in comparison to other industries regarding that transparency and documentation.
Yeah, I mean, some things take a little bit longer, but it's good to hear that there was a standardization request going out to CEN. We have just closed the first drafts of the general digital product passport and system at CEN-CENELEC standardization, the JTC 24. So that's a very good sign that they're asking for European standardization. And this will give us something very concrete, which is relevant in all European countries, to then have standards on particular parts of this material passport and the building industry. You also mentioned that the environmental product declarations is something that is already been used or looked at the moment in the construction sector. Please tell us a little bit about that, because that's a very important information that you need for a product and probably also from the supply chain. So what is it? What data does it contain? What format does it have? Why is it required? Give us a little bit of insights, please, about that.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting format that also is preparing that digital product passport for construction materials. And so we don't start at zero. So that's good news. The EPDs, so these environmental product declarations, are kind of short summaries of a certain product that contains the material content. So this is a beam of steel and reinforced concrete. Then it tells you how much concrete is in it, what does the concrete contains of, so how much water, cement, and all these kind of things. Also the reinforcement steel, it gives you the carbon footprint of that product. So it's always connected to a certain unit, cubic meters, meter, square meter, whatever. And the newer ones of these environmental product declarations even contain information where the material is coming from. So how much primary and how much secondary material, and also normally give you an idea how much in mass percent is available for recycling. So this is kind of a basis already for a product passport. The only difference is that this can be for very specific products, but it can also be for generic products. So not a very specific product of a certain producer, but could be a brick in Germany in general, standard average size, average carbon. So like the Öko-Baurat, these carbon databases, it's not always on a very specific product, what I would connect to the product passport, but it could be a more general information to an industry standard, for example. And what is interesting,
secondary data or primary data, basically.
Exactly. And what happened, or what is happening now, that we have also the construction product regulation, so CPR on a European level, that brings this EPD or that information to a next level. It's also translated in local law, or so in a German law and for all the other countries. And out of this construction product regulation, the product passport for construction materials will evolve. And then there was often the question, are these EPD still necessary or not? I think in some cases they will be replaced by a digital product passport, because that product passport contains all the information than the EPD and maybe even a bit more. But there are also non-harmonized areas for construction products where there won't be a digital product passport. In this case, these environmental product declarations will still continue also in the future to be the database for certain calculations. So we kind of have two streams, and the digital product passports for the construction sector is a long-lasting projects. They assume at the moment between 10 and 15 years until the last harmonized group of products will really have then that digital product passport. So that means could be in some cases that for 10 years we still use the EPDs before we will have finally the product passport board. But for example, steel and cement, they already started with the digital passport. So in these cases, we will have the information very soon. And I think it makes sense because these are the materials that contain, or is for the mass evaluation, they are most relevant, because still most parts, or the biggest parts of a building is concrete, is steel. Infrastructure, if you think about bridges, about railways, it's also mineral stuff and steel. So it makes sense to start with those areas that are used more often, or that have the highest impact also on environmental topics. So we are in a process. It's moving, but probably it still takes some while until we have the full digital transparency of the sector.
Thank you, Patrick, for those details. Just one question. The environmental product declaration, is that standardized somewhere today?
Yes. There's a standard also on a European level. I think it's even an ISO norm, an ISO standard. So in this case, it's standardized, and they're different. So they're interesting, or similar to the product passport. There are local authorities that take proof and control the calculations. So it's a third-party certification system, and these approvals are on a local level. So the German has an approval institute, French do have one, and so on. But the calculation methodology behind it is always the same.
So the environmental product declaration also specifies how the environmental footprint is calculated, which is also an important part, right? So this is specified there as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's very important. And I see the current discussions, which are already lasting for 3 years, how to calculate the carbon footprint for batteries, for example, and that there are different standards, and that we are still waiting for the delegated act that defines how exactly do we have to calculate the carbon footprint for batteries. So this is still outstanding.
And that's partially true as well, unfortunately, for the construction industry as well, because we do have that idea, but it's not always the same. So in practice, the calculations differ partially, depends a bit, not maybe not on a product level, but then especially on the building level. And there we do wait for the same thing. And it is at least mentioned that this year, by the end of this year, we will also have a harmonized European methodology on how to calculate the footprint of a building, because this is at the end the unit we are looking at when we want to compare, of course, on a product level, but normally we do it then on a building level.
Patrick, you mentioned before that the construction industry is not the most digital industry yet. Can you tell us where digital information already plays a role and it is used in the construction industry? Where can we maybe already use data for the digital product passport?
Yeah, as we have a very diverse manufacturer field, some like light bulbs, all heating, cooling, is pretty much digitized as in a battery production, for example. Others like the concrete production or some other parts are rather manual, and we hardly have any information, and we calculate with estimations very often. So there's a big step to go. Sensors and all these kind of things are evolving. So we are making progress. And then when you think about the planning and construction process itself, there is building information modeling. So that's the 3D part that planners can work with, also construction companies can work with. But if I would estimate maybe 15% of the projects are really done in a digital way that we can take that 3D models with information behind it on where the things are, what they contain of with the product code, and all the others just design in 3D models, but there's no data behind the model, so we can't use it. And that would be the interesting part also for me to see what we can learn as the construction industry from other industries, or where you made your experience within, for example, battery and or other transparency measures in other industries.
What is interesting for in the area of batteries? Batteries was the first product that where a digital product passport or battery passport became mandatory. It's becoming mandatory in February 2027. That's very soon. And when this started, we were looking at the information that needed to be in the battery passport, and everyone was busy trying to find technologies, how to express that. And then very soon, it was clear that the battery passport needs to be filled with meaningful data. And where does that come from? So it has to come from the supply chain. And then immediately it was clear that if we do not have standards for exchanging data in the supply chain, what does that mean for small supply chain actors? It means that they might have to fill hundreds of systems with different standards in providing data in different ways, which would be highly inefficient, and especially for small actors, not very profitable. So I was looking into the United Nations Transparency Protocol, which was evolving at the same time. And then I engaged myself into that area, and I had the honor to write recommendation 49 last year, which was passing last year the UN CFAC plenary. And this is an important groundwork for supply chain data exchange. It describes means for policymakers to make a positive contribution to the UN sustainability goals, sustainable development goals, through establishing trust in supply chain data, reduce cost and complexity, for supply chain actors, support small and medium-sized enterprises, and especially low-income countries. And then after we wrote this recommendation 49, we started building the United Nations Transparency Protocol, which is implementing the principles of recommendation 49. And that means that's a protocol that was, by the way, also endorsed by the G7 states last year in Canada, 2025, to use the standard as a means to exchange trustworthy data in the supply chain, especially for critical raw materials, which you are also using some, right? So you steel, I mean, that's not a critical raw material, but still it's a raw material, and we're currently concentrating on the material that is in batteries, for example, nickel, cobalt, lithium, of course, and other critical raw materials. And we're defining currently how would a copper product passport, for example, look like. What is needed for what data is needed for the digital for the battery passport. So we're creating standards there, which then hopefully can also be used by other industries, because maybe you have copper in your buildings. You do, right? You have all kinds
Definitely.
of wire that you need.
Yes.
So that's the contribution we're hoping to make with UNTP for general supply chains, starting with critical raw materials, or putting at least a focus on it. And there's a really nice project currently being launched, or had been launched, by the Global Battery Alliance, that is has filed for the extension owner or specification owner for the battery data, which are collecting site reports from the supply chain and is standardizing battery passport data, which then end up in a battery benchmark. As you mentioned before, you're working on a score for buildings. The Global Battery Alliance is working on a score for batteries, and they're very well advanced. It took a long time, but now the benchmarks are out, and this project is trialing these benchmarks with information from the supply chain defined in UNTP. And the great initiative, what is in parallel, is the cooperation with the International Trade Center that is building tools, open public good tools, so that everyone in the supply chain has a tool to participate at this ecosystem. So we're trying to lower the burden for everyone to participate tremendously, because I believe it cannot be an expensive software that everyone needs to participate. So that's what we're currently doing in the battery sector and on UN level. And honestly, I believe that this will be a new form of electronic data exchange. We all know the EDIFACT messages, or the people that are in the technical area, the electronic data interchange, but it was built 40 years ago. And the UN ECE is now also looking at a migration path from EDIFACT to UNTP, because with UNTP, you can exchange data more efficiently, more trustworthy, and especially in an ad hoc fashion. So even if you have a supplier that is at the other part of the world that you've never been in touch with or have never contracted, you can easily exchange data with them without a big hurdle. So that's what we're doing, and hope to support not only the battery industry, but also the building industry and other industries that need product passports.
Definitely, because as you mentioned, a lot of wires, a lot of the technical equipment within a building is actually built out of these raw materials. So if you have the product passport of copper or something similar, this will be the same one in a building. So we're more than happy to also align or copy just that information. And we just need to create it for the other stuff like the concrete, the wood, whatever. And that's also what is still a bit missing, that understanding of the criticality of that materials, because the construction industry still thinks everything is there forever, long lasting. But this is not the case. And we do see this sometimes when you see construction sites at the moment, they are safeguarded with cameras, with fences, because if there's copper or these more valuable materials, metals in there, people are just stealing it because they know about the value. And that's more and more taking place also in the minds of the manufacturers in the construction industry, that they need to take care of the value of that material, and that there's, for example, no aluminium mine in Europe. So we are importing all the aluminium in the facades, in the windows, and we know also about the stress in the supply chains on a global level, and that makes our industry rethink and is pushing also the idea of a product passport about digitalization, because there's real economic value in knowing which material is where.
Yeah, I can imagine that maybe not only the materials that are marked as critical raw materials are critical raw materials. Maybe for you, the building industry, there's other material that is also very relevant, and where we need to have that available to be resilient with our construction industry. So I'm glad to hear that you're volunteering for the UN Buildings Transparency Protocol. I hear from your last response.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, but I think it will go into that direction, and we have a lot of templates for you that you can simply use, and the construction industry can use to then build their specific, I don't know, concrete passports and the like. So what do you believe do we need to do next to make this a success, to have standards available, to have the right means available to make the construction industry more sustainable? Is it standards? Is it regulation? What do you think is the most important thing that needs to happen next?
Well, I think regarding the standards, the regulation, there's already a lot in place. It just needs some time to get the transformation done. Coming back to my introduction, I think what really would help the industry is that this becomes part of a value. So a building with more transparency, with more product passports, with more digitalization is worth more than analog, a manual building, because at the end, this is what triggers the industry. Either there's a law that enforces the industry to do certain things, or because people understand the value of that transparency. So these are the two things that I think need to happen, and it makes sense that a building where I know more about has less risk, and that this is worth more. So this is, I think, the direction where it should go in the construction industry.
Very, very nice summary. Thank you, Patrick. We're at the end of this podcast. We could have discussed many, many more things. We'll put a lot of links in the show notes so that everyone who's interested can deep dive into material passports in the construction industry. Thank you very much for coming to the podcast, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you, and goodbye.